I didn't notice her at first. That's the part that still sits wrong in my chest, the fact that, for weeks, maybe months, I walked past her like everyone else. Like she was part of the furniture. Like she didn't exist. Her name was Marianne. I know that now. Back then, she was just the woman by the window. I work in an office where silence is loud. You can hear judgment in the way keyboards stop when someone walks by. You can feel hierarchy in who gets eye contact and who doesn't. And Marianne, she was invisible. Always dressed too plainly for corporate taste. Always eating lunch alone. Always sitting at that desk by the window that never quite opened all the way, as if even the building refused to let her breathe. I'm telling you this in first person because I need you to understand something. I was not a hero. Not at the beginning. I was just less cruel than the rest. The first time I really saw her was on a Tuesday, the kind of Tuesday that smells like burnt coffee and quiet resentment. Someone had forwarded an email meant for HR to the entire department. It mocked Marianne's work, her pace, her odd behavior. People laughed. Soft laughs. Controlled laughs. The kind that say I'm glad it's not me. I remember feeling my jaw tighten. Not because I knew her, but because I knew that kind of laughter. I'd heard it before, years ago, when my own name used to circulate in whispers instead of respect. At lunch, I sat across from her. She looked up like I'd startled her, fork frozen midair. Her eyes flicked around the cafeteria, as if waiting for the punchline. Is this seat taken? I asked. She shook her head slowly. No. But, people don't usually sit here. I get tired of the noise, I said. A lie. Or maybe a half-truth. She nodded, like she understood more than I'd said. We ate in silence for a while. And then, without looking at me, she whispered, they think I don't notice. I didn't ask who. I didn't need to. I just said, they always do. That's when she finally looked at me. Really looked. And in her eyes, I saw something that made my stomach turn, not sadness, not fear, but patience. The kind of patience people develop when they're waiting for something inevitable. If you're feeling this tension already, do me a favor, tap the like button now. It tells the algorithm this story is worth hearing, and I promise you, we're only scratching the surface. Over the next few days, Marianne and I started talking more. Small things. Harmless things. Weather. Deadlines. The way the office AC was always too cold for women and never cold enough for men in suits. But every now and then, she'd say something that didn't quite fit. Like when she mentioned she'd been at the company longer than most of management, even though her title suggested otherwise. Or when she casually referenced meetings that happened years before I was hired. Or when she said, very calmly, some marriages are built on other people's silence. That last one stayed with me. I went home that night to my husband, successful, charming, respected. The kind of man people trusted instinctively. The kind of man whose name opened doors. The kind of man who worked in the same company. I told myself it was nothing. Coincidence. Office gossip poisoning my thoughts. But when I kissed him goodnight, I realized something terrifying. Marianne had never once asked me a question. She was waiting. Waiting for me to connect the dots. And somewhere deep in my chest, a quiet voice started whispering the truth I wasn't ready to hear. I started noticing patterns the way you notice cracks in a wall you've lived beside for years, not all at once, but suddenly impossible to ignore. Marianne never spoke during meetings unless spoken to. When she did, her voice was precise, controlled, and unsettlingly calm. Not hesitant. Not unsure. Just deliberate. As if every word had already been weighed against consequences the rest of us couldn't see. People cut her off. All the time. No one apologized. One afternoon, after a meeting where her suggestion was ignored and then repeated verbatim by a senior manager, who received praise for it, I caught her folding a piece of paper into impossibly small squares. Over and over again. Crease after crease. They do that a lot, I said gently. She smiled without looking up. Yes. But repetition has a way of revealing ownership, doesn't it? That should have been my first real warning. Later that day, I overheard my husband on the phone in our living room. He didn't know I was home yet. His voice was low, intimate in a way that had nothing to do with love. I told you, that situation is handled, he said. She doesn't have leverage anymore. I stood still in the hallway, my heels digging into the rug. She wouldn't dare, he continued, a short laugh following. Not after everything. Everything. That word followed me into my dreams. The next morning, Marianne arrived earlier than usual. She placed a thin folder on my desk as if it were nothing, as if it didn't contain the weight I felt the moment I touched it. Read this when you're alone, she said. And please, don't react right away. What is it? I asked. She hesitated. Just for a second. Long enough to matter. It's proof, she replied. And an apology. Both long overdue. The folder contained emails. Old ones. Dated years back. Performance reviews that contradicted her current record. Notes from closed-door meetings I was never supposed to see. And names. Familiar names. Including my husband's. My chest tightened as if the air itself had grown heavy. The emails weren't explicit, that would have been too easy. Instead, they told a story through omissions. Through decisions that quietly redirected credit, opportunity, and blame. Marianne had built a project that made careers. Someone else had taken the credit. And when she objected, she was slowly erased. Demoted without paperwork. Isolated without cause. Labeled difficult. Unstable. Not a team player. I felt sick. Why me? I asked her later, my voice barely steady. Why show me this? She finally met my eyes. Because, she said softly, you're married to the one person who still believes I'm invisible. That night, I didn't confront my husband. I watched him instead. Watched how confidently he spoke about ethics at work. About loyalty. About how some people sabotage themselves and then look for villains. I realized something chilling then. He wasn't afraid of the truth. He was convinced it would never reach me. If this realization is hitting you right now, take a second and hit like. Not for drama, but because stories like this exist everywhere, quietly, until someone decides to listen. Marianne and I began meeting outside the office. Coffee shops. Parks. Places where walls couldn't hear us. She told me everything. About the affair he'd had years ago, not with her, but because of her. About how he'd promised protection in exchange for silence. About how marriage, in his world, was a shield. A reputation buffer. I never wanted revenge, she said once. I just wanted my name back. That's when it hit me. Helping her wasn't about exposing him. It was about choosing whether I would continue living inside a lie that benefited me, or step into a truth that would cost me everything. And somewhere between the coffee cooling on the table and Marianne's steady breathing across from me, I felt my marriage begin to crack, quietly, irreversibly. There's a moment, right before something collapses, when it becomes aware of itself. That's the best way I can describe what happened next. My husband started watching me. Not obviously. Not in a jealous, dramatic way. It was subtler than that, the way he'd pause when I mentioned Marianne's name. The way he'd ask casual questions that were anything but casual. She's still struggling, he asked one evening, swirling ice in his glass. Some people just aren't built for pressure. I smiled. Practiced. We all struggle sometimes. He studied me for a beat too long. The office atmosphere shifted, too. Marianne was suddenly included in emails she'd been excluded from for years. People smiled at her in hallways. HR scheduled a routine review of her role. Too neat. Too fast. They know, I told her during one of our walks. Or at least, they suspect. Marianne didn't look surprised. Good, she said. That means the lie is nervous. She showed me something then, a backup drive. Encrypted. Duplicated. Time-stamped. She hadn't just documented what was done to her. She documented who benefited. My name wasn't on that list. Yet. The next test came at work, during a leadership meeting I wasn't supposed to influence. I casually referenced one of Marianne's early projects, by name, by date, with details only someone deeply familiar would know. The room went quiet. My husband's pen stopped moving. That was before my time, someone said quickly. I tilted my head. Actually, no. Records show otherwise. That was the first time I saw fear flash across my husband's face. That night, he confronted me. Not with anger. With concern. I worry you're getting too close to office drama, he said, sitting beside me on the couch. People like Marianne, they pull others down when they fall. I looked at the man I'd loved for over a decade. The man who knew how I took my coffee, how I hated sleeping with the TV on, how my voice cracked when I lied. And I realized, he didn't know me anymore. Or maybe he never had. You always told me the truth mattered, I said softly. Even when it was uncomfortable. He exhaled, slow and controlled. Truth is subjective. That was it. That was the sentence that ended my marriage, even if neither of us said it out loud. If you're feeling that shift right now, that point of no return, hit like. It helps more people find this story, and sometimes, recognizing the moment is how we survive it. The next day, Marianne was called into HR. She didn't panic. She texted me one word. No. I arrived just as voices rose behind frosted glass. Legal language. Carefully chosen threats. I sat in. Uninvited. The room froze. Marianne placed a single document on the table. It wasn't evidence. It was a resignation letter. Effective immediately. You can't do this, HR said. You're under review. She smiled. That's exactly why I can. She walked out with her head high, not defeated, but finished. That afternoon, my husband came home early. You embarrassed me, he said quietly. You chose her. I corrected him. No, I said. I chose myself. He stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. He didn't see it yet. But the lie was unraveling. And in the silence that followed, I knew the truth wouldn't explode. It would leak. Slowly. Into everything. The thing about leaks is that they don't announce themselves. They stain. At first, nothing happened. No scandal. No emails marked urgent. No whispered meetings behind closed doors. Just tension. The kind that sits in your shoulders and makes sleep feel like a negotiation. Marianne disappeared from the office like she'd never been there. No farewell email. No goodbye cake. Her desk was cleared before lunch. Too clean. My husband became meticulous. Every word he spoke felt rehearsed. Every gesture calibrated. He started asking where I was going, who I was meeting, how long I'd be out, all framed as concern, all sharp around the edges. "You're pulling away," he said one night. "I'm paying attention," I replied. He didn't like that answer. A week later, the first crack showed. An internal audit was announced. Quietly. Framed as routine. But audits have a way of circling the same names, the same projects, over and over again. My husband came home pale. "They're reopening old files," he said, trying to sound casual. "Stuff that doesn't matter anymore." "Then why are you shaking?" I asked. He laughed. Too quickly. "I'm not." I thought of Marianne then, her patience, her preparation, her refusal to rush the truth. She'd lit the fuse and walked away. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the man beside me breathe, and wondered how many lies you could share a bed with before they started breathing back. If you're still with me, take a second and subscribe. Not for the algorithm, for yourself. Some stories change how you recognize danger. The next morning, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Marianne, they've found it." My heart slammed against my ribs. "Found what?" I typed. "The pattern," she replied. "And they're going to pretend they discovered it on their own." That's when I understood her final move. She hadn't exposed them publicly. She'd forced them to expose themselves. Emails resurfaced. Decisions re-examined. Promotions questioned. And once one thread was pulled, others followed: nepotism, favoritism, quiet settlements buried in budgets no one had reviewed in years. My husband stopped sleeping. He stopped touching me. He stopped pretending. One evening, he sat across from me at the kitchen table, eyes hollow. "You knew," he said. "You let this happen." I held his gaze. "No. I stopped protecting you from consequences." Silence stretched between us, thick, suffocating. "You think this makes you better?" he asked. I shook my head. "It makes me free." 2 days later, his name appeared on a list. Not public. Not yet. But final. He was asked to resign. No ceremony. No explanation. Just an exit wrapped in legal language and non-disclosure agreements. Our marriage didn't end in shouting. It ended in boxes. In separate bedrooms. In a quiet realization that love built on omission collapses the moment someone refuses to look away. The last message I ever received from Marianne came that night. "Some fires don't destroy," she wrote. "They reveal what was always ash." The morning after he moved his last box out, the apartment felt unfamiliar. Not empty, just honest. I walked barefoot across the floor, noticing things I'd ignored for years. The absence of his cologne. The way the light hit the wall where his diploma used to hang. Proof of success. Proof of respectability. Proof of nothing, really. People assume the end of a marriage is loud. Crying. Screaming. Accusations thrown like weapons. Ours ended in whispers. In logistical emails. In a shared calendar slowly erased. At work, no one mentioned his name. Not once. It was as if the company had collectively agreed to forget him, the same way they'd forgotten Marianne. Except this time, forgetting felt intentional. HR called me in. Not to apologize. Not to explain. To assess. "How are you coping with the changes?" they asked, pens poised. I smiled the way women learn to smile when being evaluated. "I'm adjusting." They nodded, satisfied. Adjustment is acceptable. Grief is not. A week later, I met Marianne again. She looked different, lighter, somehow. Not happier. Just unburdened. We sat on a park bench, watching people pass like background characters in lives that didn't include us. They offered me a settlement, she said casually. With conditions. Did you take it? I asked. Yes, she replied. Because justice and revenge aren't the same thing. I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. She turned to me then. You should know. I never expected you to choose truth over comfort. I didn't choose you, I said. I chose to stop lying to myself. She smiled at that. If this moment resonates, that quiet after the storm, leave a like. It tells me you're still here, still listening. The consequences came slowly. Friends stopped calling. Invitations faded. Couples we used to see every month suddenly became busy. I wasn't accused, I was avoided. That's the price of disrupting a comfortable narrative. At work, I was promoted. Not celebrated. Repositioned. They framed it as growth. I recognized it as containment. A way to keep me visible, but not dangerous. I accepted anyway. Because survival isn't cowardice. One evening, months later, I received a message from an unknown number. You ruined him. I stared at the screen, waiting for the familiar guilt to rise. It didn't. I typed back one sentence. No. I stopped helping him ruin others. I blocked the number. That night, I slept without dreaming for the first time in years. The quiet wasn't peaceful. But it was real. And real is something you can build on. Freedom has a strange aftertaste. It isn't relief, not at first. It's awareness. The kind that makes you realize how many rooms you were surviving in instead of living. Months passed. My new role came with windows and responsibilities but no real allies. People were polite. Careful. They measured their words around me like I might be contagious. A cautionary tale with good posture. Then the email started. Not from the company. From women. They didn't use Marianne's name. Most didn't know it. But they described the same pattern: ideas diluted, credit redirected, boundaries crossed quietly, careers stalled behind closed doors. I thought it was just me. I didn't have proof. He made it sound like I misunderstood. I read every message. Some at midnight. Some with my hands shaking. I realized then that Marianne hadn't been the anomaly. She'd been the warning. If this realization is settling in your chest right now, pause and like the video. Not for momentum, for acknowledgement. These stories exist because silence protects patterns. One afternoon, I was called into a meeting with legal. This time, it wasn't about risk. It was about memory. They wanted me to confirm timelines. Interpret intent. Translate culture. I did. Carefully. Truthfully. Without embellishment. I wasn't exposing anyone. I was refusing to distort. That distinction mattered. Later that day, I met Marianne for the last time. She was leaving the city. I don't want to be the woman this place remembers, she said. I want to be the woman I become next. I hugged her, tightly, finally, and felt the full weight of what she'd given up so others wouldn't have to start from zero. You already changed things, I told her. She shook her head. No. You did. You stayed. That night, alone in my apartment, I opened a document. I started writing. Not names. Not accusations. Patterns. Language. Moments where power hides behind politeness. I didn't publish it. Not yet. But I understood something crucial then. Truth doesn't always arrive as an explosion. Sometimes it moves like sound, invisible, traveling further than you think, changing direction when it meets resistance. And you don't get to choose where the echo lands. There's a version of me that still flinches when a door closes too hard. She lives somewhere behind my ribs, holding memories like receipts, proof of things paid for that were never returned. I met her again when I ran into my ex-husband at the grocery store. It was ordinary. That was the cruelest part. He looked smaller. Not physically, internally. Like someone who'd lost the audience that once reflected him back as important. We stood by the produce, pretending not to notice how close we were. "I hear you're doing well," he said finally. "I hear you moved," I replied. Silence filled the space where intimacy used to live. "They were looking for someone to blame," he said, carefully. "You made it easy." I turned to him then. "Really looked?" "No," I said. "I made it accurate." He winced. "Good. If this moment feels familiar, confronting the ghost of who you trusted, hit like. Not for drama. For recognition." That night, I opened old journals. The ones I'd written early in our marriage. I saw the pattern clearly then, how often I'd minimized myself to maintain harmony. How I'd edited my instincts into something more palatable. Marianne hadn't changed me. She'd reminded me. The next email came weeks later. Internal. Anonymous. Attached to my draft. Someone had shared my document. Without permission. I panicked, then I stopped. Because it wasn't distorted. It was expanded. Other voices had been added. Footnotes of lived experience. A collective memory forming in real time. I wasn't in control anymore. And for the first time, that didn't terrify me. HR called it a culture conversation. Legal called it risk mitigation. The women who wrote to me called it, finally. That's when I understood the last lie I'd been living with. That survival requires silence. It doesn't. It requires discernment. And I had learned mine too late to save my marriage, but just in time to save myself. The meeting was scheduled for 90 minutes. It lasted 4 hours. No raised voices. No confessions. Just careful language peeling back years of avoidance, one clause at a time. Policies rewritten in real time. Names never spoken, but fully understood. I wasn't there as a witness. I was there as a reference point. That realization landed heavier than any accusation ever could. At one point, someone asked, "What outcome are we actually seeking here?" The room went quiet. I spoke before I could stop myself. "Continuity," I said. "Without harm." They wrote it down. If you're still listening, still breathing with this story, subscribe now. Not for me. For the woman you might one day decide to believe. After that day, things didn't become perfect. They became possible. Training sessions replaced whispers. Reporting lines were clarified. Power became slightly less invisible. Not fair. Just visible. I received one last message from Marianne, months later. A photo of a small desk by a wide window. Sunlight everywhere. "I'm building something new," she wrote. "Thank you for standing where I couldn't anymore." I stared at the image longer than necessary. I thought of the woman by the window in the old office, the one no one saw. And how seeing her had cost me a marriage. And given me a life. The story didn't end with exposure. It ended with alignment. With no more split selves. With the quiet confidence that comes from knowing, when the moment arrived, I didn't look away. A year later, someone new sat by the window. Not the same desk. Not the same building. But the same light, hesitant in the morning, generous in the afternoon. This time, it was me. I had changed companies quietly. No dramatic exit. No victory lap. Just a decision to stop asking institutions to become humane and start choosing spaces that already were. On my first day, a woman introduced herself and said, "I heard you're someone who listens." I felt something tighten behind my eyes. I said. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about my marriage. Not with longing, with clarity. I see it now as a structure built on borrowed silence. Comfortable. Impressive. Hollow. Losing it didn't break me. It unburied me. If this story stayed with you until now, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. Stories like this don't survive without witnesses. I never heard from my ex-husband again. But every now and then, I hear from someone else. A forwarded email. A quiet thank you. A sentence that starts with, "I thought I was alone." And each time, I remember Marianne. Not as the woman everyone ignored. But as the woman who understood something before all of us. Truth doesn't need permission. It only needs one person willing to sit down at the table and say, "I see you." That was the moment everything changed. That was the moment I did.